Hey there, what's up everybody? Hope you're doing well today. I'm not going to waste too much time on an introduction because typically when I do this, I feel like I get ahead of myself and I give away what I'm building towards. There's no payoff in the end. And this is already kind of inevitable with titles and thumbnails. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the title, you see the thumbnail, you kind of know where I'm going. And I come up with this stuff after the video. So, that's kind of the downfall is you want a title that is kind of provocative and interesting, but not one that gives away everything so that someone watches your video for 2 seconds and is like, yeah, I kind of know where you're going with this. So that's such a delicate balance, but I think I definitely hurt myself a little bit when I give so much of an intro that I kind of go over where I'm going to be driving towards for the whole episode. And if you're listening through podcast, you don't see the thumbnail, but you see a title. And this is still supposed to be kind of a summation of what's talked about. So it's a really tough thing, but I'm just going to ask that you trust the process on this one. It's going to be a really cool payoff in the end, and I don't want to give all of it away ahead of time. I just kind of came across this a couple weeks ago, reading through a book on typology that, if you've watched any of my videos, this is something I love. This is a study I find really interesting. I've talked about it in the podcast quite a bit as well. So this is what we're going to go into today. It's found in the book of Exodus and also in the book of Joshua. And you'll remember the Passover story in the book of Exodus is found in chapter 12. And it's really interesting. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, and God is about to free them. He has plagued the Egyptians, and they're just about ready to relent, but he's got one last plague to send on them. He's going to send the death angel into Egypt and strike down the firstborn. And what he tells the Israelites in order to protect them, he says, I'm here not to kill you, I'm here to save you, but what you need to do in order to protect yourselves, or rather as a sign of my protection, it's not really them protecting themselves, it's God saying, do this, and then I won't strike you down. It's a sign of the protection that I'm going to afford you, is you're going to kill a lamb, one lamb for each household, and put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and the lintel of your house, and when the death angel comes through the land, it will look at the blood on the door and pass over you. And so this is what happens. The people of Israel listen, they obey, and they are spared. And there's a great wailing in all of Egypt. And there is, the death of the firstborn, and everybody in the land of Egypt is affected, but Israel is saved from this plague, and that's the final straw. And Egypt finally, or at least Pharaoh, decides, okay, get out of here. We can't take any more of these plagues. And God actually says that he's executing judgment on the gods of Egypt, which is really, really interesting. Yes, the people for their sins and their adherence to these false gods, but also the gods themselves. And so he's kind of making spiritual warfare against the gods of Egypt and showing the people, look, your gods do not have the power that I have. Whatever power they do have is only allowed by me in the first place. I am the Almighty. I have power everywhere. And Egypt gets the message. So they send Israel out after this Passover time, and they are saved by God through the marking of their doorposts with the blood of the Lamb. And specifically, I want to mention in verse 22-23, God commands them. He says, not one of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. So it's not only that they paint the doorpost and the lintel with blood, they have to stay inside. They must stay covered by that blood of the Lamb. And obviously we know there's direct parallels here to Jesus Christ. If you're a Christian, you know this already. This is kind of basic level stuff. When you read through the Exodus, you read through the New Testament, and the apostles are drawing the connections for you all over the place. Now, what's really interesting, we know that the Exodus story, the Passover story, we kind of have Moses as the central figure. He's the man of God leading the people of Israel out of Egypt, out of bondage, into freedom. Or actually, God's doing this, but he's doing it through the person of Moses. And after Moses, we know that Joshua is his successor. Now, whenever there's a biblical successor in the story of Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, we see this, but we also see it in the New as well. You might think of Moses and Joshua. You might think of Elijah and Elisha. Whenever there's a successor to a predecessor, there are certain signs that go along with that, at least textually, but also in the very lives of these people themselves that show unequivocally that God is doing the same or even a greater work work through this next person. It's a sign perhaps both to the person themselves who's wondering, like, can I do these things, or will God truly work through me, but also to the people of Israel or the people of God, or maybe to foreign people as well. And so we have Joshua coming up after Moses, and he's going to do some things that show that he is unequivocally the successor to Moses. He's going to do some things that kind of mark him as the continuation of this pattern. With Elijah and Elisha, think about it like this. Elijah does all these miracles, right? He heals a widow's son. So when Elisha comes along and he's going to kind of take over that mantle, pun intended, because that's literally what Elisha did, was take the mantle of Elijah. He goes and he heals a widow's son. So a similar thing to show the power that worked through Elijah is now also working through Elisha. And this is maybe to bolster, like I said, Elisha's confidence, but also to bolster the confidence that the people have in the fact that this person is the chosen person of God to replace the previous person in charge. So with Joshua, we see the same thing with Moses. And it's really interesting because after Moses, God promises the people that he will raise up for them a prophet like unto Moses. And so you have this question asked all throughout the Old Testament. Where is this person going to come from? Who is this person going to be? It's not until the New Testament you realize that this person is Jesus Christ, which is why a lot of the things he did, even his actions, not just his words, but his very actions and miracles, are fulfillments of Old Testament figures and things that they did to show that this is the greater person to come. This is the Messiah. This is the one like unto Moses who would come and do even greater things that they've been waiting for this whole time. But you do get partial fulfillments of this all throughout the Old Testament with the successors to some of these great men. And so with Joshua, there's no exception. He does a lot of similar things. You remember that Moses leads them out of Egypt. They have the parting of the Red Sea. Well, Joshua does a similar thing in that he goes back into Israel, kind of this second Exodus, but rather than an Exodus from the land of Egypt, it's an Exodus into the land of, or rather it's an Exodus from the wilderness into the land of Israel. And so the sea, or the Jordan River, it parts the same way that the Red Sea did, and you get this sign that Joshua, yes, in fact, is being used by God to accomplish the continuation of the work of Moses. Now, we just read through the Passover story, right? Or I just kind of walked you through it anyways. We read through the part where they're not supposed to go out of their houses until morning, and through this practice, Israel is saved. They are not only do they not suffer the plague of the firstborn dying, but they're able to leave Egypt, which is symbolic of sin, and follow God at this point. Now, there's something really interesting that happens in Joshua 2 that many people might not pick up on when the people are about to leave the wilderness. They're about to enter into the promised land. They're about to have that second Exodus kind of moment where they leave the wilderness and go into the land that God has given to them. And some spies go forward to spy out the land. Now, these aren't the same spies that happen when Moses is in charge, where he sends out the spies, including Joshua and Caleb. This is a moment where Joshua is in charge, and he sends some spies specifically to the city of Jericho, which is kind of right on the borderland. It's the first place they're going to take over, and it's going to be like their foothold into the land as they begin their conquest of the promised land. And so these spies go into the land and they meet with what's called a prostitute. Some debate, was she a prostitute? Was she just an innkeeper? That's not really important for this, besides the fact that we know that she is not of Israel. Presumably she is a sinner. I mean, every person is. So, I mean, I think prostitute's probably a good read. It's a good translation of this, but it's not really important whether you agree or disagree with that right now. But they meet with Rahab, and she tells them, I know, we've heard of all the things that your God did to you, and we don't want it to happen to us. And so she's afraid for her life, and she's petitioning the people of God and saying, please, I'll help you. I'll hide you away from the authorities who are looking to hunt you down. I will give you protection and freedom to escape back to your people, and I'm not going to tell anybody about it, but remember me, save me too, save my family. And the spies agree to this. So when she lets them go, or she asked this, like, please spare us from death. It says, deliver our lives from death. This is in Joshua 2. It says this in verse 15. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go on your way. The men said to her, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then, if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you've made us swear. And she said, according to your words, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. So, you might already see where we're going here. Maybe you've heard of this before, but it's a really amazing thing that's happening. Just like Israel in Egypt had to paint the doorposts red, here Rahab uses something red to symbolize that she should be spared from this invading army that's going to come in and destroy everything. So in a way, she is going through her very own Passover service. This red cord symbolizes that she is not to be harmed, her and her household. And there's very similar language between what happens in Exodus 12 and what happens here. If you go out of the house, your blood's on your own head. Same thing in Exodus 12. Nobody is to leave their house until the morning, and then the death angel won't come in and destroy you. So we have a lot of symbolism here that's repeated in this story to show that there's kind of a second type of Passover happening. And there's a few things really interesting about this that I want to point out. First, a lot of people might have trouble with this because in the Passover that happened in Egypt, where Israel had to paint their doorposts with blood, there was a lamb sacrificed, right? It wasn't just that the death angel saw a sign and said, okay, I'm good to go. I don't need to go in here because they kind of gave me the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Instead, something died already in substitution of these people. Now, what's interesting here, someone would look at this and say, it's a red cord. It's not blood. It's not, there's no life being given here, so it can't be the same thing. But if you back up just before this section, the spies that are with Rahab say this, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. And when they tell her to use the red cord that she let them down through the window with, it's a symbol of the life that she gave to them. And so they're saying, we will put ourselves on the line. We will be your assurance. We will be your safety. And in fact, this is what happens. Later, when Israel actually goes into Jericho and conquers this city, and it's time for the promise to be made right and fulfilled, these spies go to Joshua and say, this is what we promised. And Joshua says, as you promised it, let it be done. Go and get her and her household and her family. And they lived in Israel. So not only does this show, interestingly, in my mind, that Joshua certainly is the successor of Moses because we have a repeating of events that happens. It's proven by the repeating of language that happens, but you also have a life for a life policy happening here, where in Israel, when they're in Egypt, the Passover is the blood of the lamb is substitutionary for the people in the household. And here, the blood of these spies that are in here trying to seek out the land for themselves and discover some sort of strategy by which they can overthrow the land, they give their lives, they pledge their lives and say, our life for yours. And so there still is a life offering covering or protecting Rahab. What's also interesting to me is that whereas before the blood of the lamb covered the people, now the people are able to cover someone else. They're acting as a representative of God. And that's exactly what we do. It might seem kind of blasphemous at first because who can take God's place? Absolutely nobody can. But we do in so many ways act as ambassadors for God. And so this is kind of what they're doing. It's not to say that their blood is clean and they're a pure sacrifice or anything, but they are clean in the sense that God covered them And now they're extending that covering to Rahab, which is amazing because Rahab is not of the people of God. She's a Gentile, and yet she can be brought in. So for all of those who want to say, well, when Gentiles are entering into the covenant with God, they don't have to do any of the same thing that the old Jews had to do. That's not what's being said here. What's being said is God gave a way for the people of Israel to be saved. And by people of Israel, I mean his people. That's just the name that God's people go by all throughout time. What he's saying here is this plan extends to the Gentiles, but they have to go through the same process. They must put their faith in a promise that they will be saved through hardship or through difficulty. A life must be pledged for their life. Yes, it's not going to be easy, but the promise is extended to them, and they have to have faith and trust that that promise will be upheld. And Rahab does this exact same thing, Rahab and her whole family. And by virtue of this, she has extended invitation not just to her own life, but into the very nation of Israel. So we've got so much going on here that I think is just absolutely beautiful. God's plan for the Gentiles, or God's plan being extended to the Gentiles all along. Israel is blessed so that they might bless others. This was in the cards the whole time, and sometimes we just read right over it. Certainly the people of Israel read right over it and believed the promises were only to themselves, even while they acted it out right here. We get a fulfillment of this idea that one greater than Moses is coming, and we have this kind of hint that maybe it's Joshua, maybe it's not, we'll see. And we get this idea that he is definitely the successor to Moses. Now, obviously, in the end, he was not the one to come that was prophesied. He filled that in part, but Jesus filled it in full. We also get information on the law being done away with, and how Gentiles absolutely are still required to be obedient to God. Jesus offered his blood, and now Gentiles can enter in through that same method. We all walk through that same door. It's not like the Jews through the law walked through one door and the Gentiles get to go in the back or the side door. That's not what's happening here. We all walk in the same way by the grace of Jesus Christ. Here, I think we get a picture story that shows it beautifully. And so I really love this section. I think it's absolutely fascinating. There's so much here, and it's just in a few verses where you might miss it because they're kind of separated by quite a few chapters. But I think this is what's going on here, and it's something that is just absolutely beautiful, not only for the salvation of Rahab and her family, but what it means for all people, not just the people of Israel, but for all people to enter in through that Passover, through that blood of Jesus Christ, and be saved and brought into his community, brought into the people of God, and have the name of Israel placed on them as well.